With 4.4 million blog posts, 720,000 hours uploaded to YouTube and 500 million tweets per day, the relentless march of content just seems to be accelerating. Outshouting this frenzied noise probably isn't the best way to compete. And so as creators, we need to come up with different ways of cutting through the noise rather than trying to shout over it. Cutting through the noise is, loosely speaking, what we mean when we talk about content strategy. It's the decisions we make on the why, the what, and the how of the content that we create rather than just competing on noise. In the most basic sense, we can imagine three different strategies. So let's say strategy A is to simply write as many words as possible on whatever happens to pop into your head. Strategy B might be to write only on the topics that interest you. Maybe you only post once per week. And strategy C might be to decidedly create content for a specific group of people or groups X, Y, and Z, post only to the channels that they consume on, and take note of how they respond and update your processes accordingly. Each of those strategies is going to have a different set of actions, a different way for you to allocate your resources and your attention. And that's kind of the whole point of content strategy. And when it comes to creating your own, that's exactly what we're going to cover in this video. We'll do it in 6 steps. We'll talk about the who, the what, the why of your strategy. We'll discuss how to set clear targets, then how to create and brainstorm ideas on top of that. Talk about researching ideas and informing your campaigns. Then we'll discuss how to set those campaigns up in a timeline. And finally, we'll discuss how to archive and reflect on those content efforts you've already been putting in. So let's get into it. For this series, we're going to be using the Content OS as our framework for talking through these topics. And first on the list, we're going to head into this planning and strategy section and hit strategy for our home dashboard on all things strategy and strategic planning. So as mentioned in the introduction, there are a few key elements that are going to crop up in any content strategy. That's what we've got in front of us, and let's just walk through them piece by piece very quickly. Personally, I like to start any strategic thinking by just simply returning back to the fundamentals. What is the mission or the vision for your business? What's it all for? What's the big why for, why are we creating this content in the first place? What are our kind of business objectives? And from there, we can start to sketch out some more details. So perhaps in that process, you've already scoped out some key audience segments or some user personas. If you haven't, we have a pre-built user persona template in here that you can fill out and link throughout the content workspace. So just thinking about, what are the key traits of the people that we're trying to engage with our content, that's obviously going to be a major factor for how we communicate, what the messaging is, and especially which platforms we want to target. And when we know our audience and what we're trying to achieve, we can scope out our key channels. We can set some specific objectives, which we'll talk about in a little moment. And we can also link any of our competitor research into this workspace here. So, we are targeting these particular segments. We're using these channels. That's already going to be enough for us to go out and research some of the key competitors in our space who are doing similar things, who might be doing different things. And we can just quickly take any notes that we are seeing about them. We have a competitor's template pre-built into this, which is going to give some more details for you to fill out if you want to take this process a little bit further, value proposition and such. You can work through that for yourself as a little exercise. With some key competitors sketched out, we can also look at some broader market trends, what's going on in your space more generally. And once we have collected some information about our key audience, about the channels that we want to use, who's active out there, what else is going on in the space, we can return back to this strategic pillars section, and we're really just trying to formulate a few rules for our strategy. If you're familiar at all with game thinking, that's a very good way of thinking about a strategy as a set of rules that you can almost follow on autopilot. So what are the things that I don't want to have to think about every single day when I return to work? I just know these are the rules that I want to follow. They're the heuristics, they're the kind of shortcuts that are going to help me take a specific approach. So for example, after researching more about this segment, more about the channels and competitors, I might decide that using a keyword-oriented strategy and kind of using the SEO channel might be one of the best ways for me to reach the targets in my business. I might decide that I want to tell a bit more of the brand story on a different channel, and so Medium and social media might be a way for that messaging to come across. There might be also some kind of core values that sneak into the strategic pillars, things like show, don't tell. That's a bit of a shortcut for saying, okay, wherever we can do video or we can do screen sharing like this, perhaps that's a better means of communicating rather than simply writing a 3,000 word guide or content article about it. So every business is going to have their own strategic pillars, and a good way of thinking about it is for your content strategy. What are the rules that you want to put on autopilot so that if you just blindly followed those rules, those pillars, you would be in a good position to hit your objectives for the business? And speaking a little more specifically about our objectives for the business, we can hone in on some key content objectives or targets that we want to set for two main areas. And so we've linked it as outcome and action as the two types of objectives that we want to set. Very, very quickly or very broadly speaking, outcome goals or objectives are going to be the things that we can measure. Those are going to be the things that show up in our performance metrics, things like followers, things like open rates, things like product sales. These are all outcomes of actions that we've taken. The other type, as listed here, are action goals or objectives or targets. These are things that are in our control. Something like publishing 2 articles per week is in our control. It's still a target that we want to hold ourselves accountable to, so we can create it as an action objective. Furthermore, in this objectives database, you'll see that there is a target number that we can set. There's a current value for that particular objective, and this is going to be a formula that automatically shows us our progress. You can also set a metric. There's a pre-built database of common metrics for content marketing and the types of businesses that might benefit from this setup. And so you can choose from this pre-built list. You can also choose the relevant tools that you're using in your business. For this case, we've chosen HubSpot, email open rate. We're going for a target of 40%, and the current might be 35%. So you can see this is not going to show 35%. It's going to show a progress value for our target in this context. So we have some clear targets now. We have a bit of a strategy and some key pillars that we want to focus on. In the process of thinking this through, you probably already have some ideas bouncing around and arriving for the types of content. Maybe you already had an idea for a business tips piece that you could write. Maybe there's a social media post. And so we have this brainstorming section kind of ready and always available. Other brainstorming sections might be your notebook. It might be on your phone. It might be a post-it note, wherever you kind of jot down ideas. If you want to consolidate it into a single database so that you can pull from this later on when you're thinking about, what's the next piece that I want to write? What's the next video? Oh, I have a list of 30 or 40 different brainstormed ideas. That's one way of using this particular workspace. But generally speaking, the brainstorming process, you can sit down and think it through, returning to the strategy, returning to some of the targets that you've set, the channels, and you can always use your competitors and the research that you're doing as inspiration. But you can use a kind of consolidated brainstorming dashboard like this to help you keep track of it all. This one happens to be sorted by 2 different factors. We have kind of categories or topics in the top grouping, and then we have the type of media, so video, social media post, article, tweet, in the rows. Another good route to creating or planning a specific content campaign is to just derive it from your research. So you might, instead of using the brainstorming phase immediately, you might spend some time going out and doing some more active research, or you might, if you implement the system, you can always use this database as kind of a pool for all of your browsing activity, all of your reading, anything that you find on the web. If you add the Notion web clipper, or you can actually use a new web extension from Prototion, which has a bit more functionality than the Notion web clipper. Either way, anything that you're browsing on the internet, reading a Medium article, you found a PDF, ebook, a website that you like, you can link that directly from the browser into this research database. Then when you come back to your research, to your planning phase, you can lean into or you can reflect on some of the things that you've been consuming and start to apply that to a specific campaign or an article idea that you want to write about. We've started with this brainstorming view rather than the campaigns or any specific articles, because that tends to be kind of a natural progression from we have our planning and our strategy stage, we have some clear targets that we know we need to hit. Some ideas are going to kind of come forth. And once you've spent some time brainstorming and thinking through what are some ways that we could move from where we are now to where we want to be using our strategy, then we're in a position where we can start to flesh out some common themes in those ideas and bring them together into a campaign. So let's say that in the brainstorming section, we noticed that there were kind of a lot of day in the life types of content, and it felt right. It felt like this is something that's going to really connect with the audience. People want to see what's going on behind the scenes. They've reacted really well to this type of content in the past, and so you notice that this is a bit of a theme, and you want to create a more focused campaign around that. So this content campaign, you can really just think of that as a collection of ideas that are going to follow a specific theme, and it might have a specific objective attached to it as well. When it comes to creating a campaign in this particular dashboard or workspace, following on from that theme that we identified in the brainstorming section, we might put this campaign in the community engagement section, and it might be something like Tell Our Story. That might be the name of the campaign that we're going to create here. We can give it a value if we have any good data to work with. In this case, we don't really, and so we can just leave it blank. It's kind of an additional element. Once we are into the kind of content creation and action stage, we'll be able to link specific actions that we need to take to this campaign here. If there's any related content research that we found, perhaps we read some articles about people having, maybe there's higher engagement rates on personal stories. Maybe it's a good idea to tell your story. Maybe that's how we came up with this idea. We can link any relevant research. Sorry, I've clicked on the wrong one, but the research, we can link that here. And finally, we can link the specific content pieces that we want to have in this campaign across all the media. So we have, we might have one that's a tweet, we might have another that's a video, another might be a social media post. We can link them all to this campaign here. And of course, with the timeline view, we can drag and extend this to the rough dates that we want this campaign to be active for. And finally, to wrap up our planning and strategy stage, we're going to review our archive section, which is simply going to be a filtered view of our various content pieces and campaigns that we have set to archive, either because we've completed them or we're putting them on hold for some reason. So let's say that from this content campaign, I had already successfully completed this pre-launch campaign and I wanted to set it to archive. It's going to disappear from this view because this is set to only show our active campaigns. When I hit the archive, it's going to show in this view. And in terms of our planning, in terms of setting our content strategy, of course, sometimes referring back to what we've done in the past, reminding ourselves of particular content pieces, the actions related to them, which keywords were related to them, and any performance metrics that we may have for this particular content or campaign. That's all part of the iterative cycle of updating our strategy, making new plans, and perhaps iterating on the targets that we've set for ourselves. So just to recap and kind of tie this all together, our content strategy begins with some key rules which we establish about how we want to approach our content creation efforts. Things like our target segments, our competitors, the channels that we operate on. These all feed into our content strategy. From there, we can set ourselves some clear targets that we're trying to achieve with our content. More specifically, things like how often we want to publish, things like the performance goals that we have set for ourselves across various channels. And from there, we can go out and either do our own research, which if we use the Notion Web Clipper, we can store in our research database, or we can start the brainstorming process already. Our brainstorming efforts will feed into campaign generation and planning, from which we can then reflect on previous campaigns to bring the whole cycle back together and start planning our next cycle. As a closing note, this video is part of a series covering the Content OS. If you'd like to get started with the system, you can head over to landmarklabs.co to learn more or follow one of the links below.